So I said to Hashem, I said to God, that, look, just like Avram Avinu when he negotiated for the survival of Sodom and Gomorrah, I said, look, if I stop doing these 10 bad things, and I thought about it, and I said 8 and 6, and then I settled on 5, and God agreed, 5. And I start doing these 5 good things, save me. And that was it.
None of your business, Ushi. None of your business, Michael.
It's the None of Your Business podcast, hosted by Michael and Ushi.
Welcome back, everybody, to the None of Your Business podcast. I'm your host, Michael Greenfield, and joined with me today is a special co-host, Mr. David Begoun. It is so nice of you to be here.
It's amazing to be here.
You fill the seat a lot better than Ushi, by the way. Only because we're in Israel.
In what way?
Only because we're in Israel. I'm saying, when it comes to being here,
I am so happy to be here. This is something we've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. This is great.
Absolutely. And we have such an amazing guest today, and I want to get right into it. But before I do, I just want to thank all our subscribers, all our comments, all our feedback, negative or positive. We love it. We like to hear what you have to say. And today, we like to hear what this man has to say. Jonathan Pollard is here with us. And what a moment for us to be shared. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really, it's just like I have goosebumps. You're just sitting here with you and feeling that, just years ago on our fridge growing up in Brooklyn, New York, was Free Jonathan all over our refrigerator. I mean, there was, pictures of us as children.
Well, trust me, you did more for me than the government of Israel did. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Wow. Something I've learned about you over the past, 20 minutes of talking to you offline, and when I met with you, is the fact that you're so transparent in everything that you say. I feel like you don't hold back any punches, and it's just a great feeling to talk to someone like that. And how did you get to that point?
Candor is very good, both for the listener and for the speaker, because you get to emet, you get to truth. And this is something that we lack in this country right now. You can't believe anything the army says. You can't believe anything the government says. You can believe everything your wife says.
You can or you must?
You absolutely, no, you can.
Okay.
Because if it gets to the point where you must, then you should look for somebody else. They're too big and strong. No, it's just the reason October 7th happened was because of government lying and military lying. You can say it's a misconception that happened, but there were 2 misconcepciot on October 7th. One was, of course, the one we know, that the army and government made a horrible mistake to which they have not been held accountable. And the people of this country had a misconception in believing them. And one can be forgiven, the other one is treason. So as far as I'm concerned, I tell people, you may not like what I say, you may not agree with it, but you should know that I'm telling you the truth as I see it. I was lied to for 35 years. I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that, and I will never inflict that on anybody else.
Wow. I have to tell you that the concept of transparency and being honest is something that I live by. And David here knows me for a while, and he can attest to that. And it's just the feeling of freedom in of itself, just being able to speak the truth.
No, correct.
Never have to watch about what you're saying and who you're saying it to. And that's what I'm learning from you. And that's why I'm so excited here. Before we start, Dave, why don't you tell us and the listeners a little bit about who you are? Because being as a co-host, just give us a quick rundown.
Should I tell them the most important thing about who I am?
Please.
Chaim, Michael, and I, we are machatunim, as they say. My son, Lebi, is married to Michael's son, Aviva.
Michael's daughter.
Michael's daughter, Aviva.
Yeah.
Let's do that again. Michael and I...
Well, that's okay in Tel Aviv, by the way. That would not have been a mistake
Michael
in
and
Tel
I
Aviv.
are machatunim. That means that we're in-laws with each other, because my son, Lebi, is married to Michael's daughter, Aviva. And we are very happy about that, because Aviva is my favorite Begoun. Did I just say that online? In front of
Yes,
everybody?
it's out there. It's in public.
Okay.
We don't edit this thing, by the way.
Okay,
Just
perfect.
warning both of you. We don't edit this podcast.
We've been here for 4 years. We came from Chicago 4 years ago. We moved here. We made Aliyah. And since then, I've been doing a number of things. I've been a tour guide, and I'm also a podcaster. We have a podcast called Israel Take 3. We've been exploring different topics related to the war, related to hostages, related to all different topics since October 7th, and now we're moving on to other topics. That's what I've been doing, podcasting. I'm a journalist by trade, also a rabbi, and trying to combine those pieces together in a sort of educational package. People are trying to understand Israel and understand how to navigate the landscape and make sense of this really crazy, nuanced world called Israel. Not that I understand it, but to the best of my ability, I help people to understand that through the journalism and the podcasting.
I have to say, the first time I met you, and Jonathan, it's a great story, you'll appreciate this, we really felt Israel as a whole when we made a l'chaim for my daughter and your son. We lifted our glass. We were in our apartment in Jerusalem, and we lifted our glasses to make a l'chaim. My daughter, his son, him, his wife, me, my wife, we all raise our glass and we make a l'chaim. The official l'chaim. As we're raising our glass, his son gets a telephone call.
Army?
And he realizes that it's somebody he has to pick up. And he goes, guys, before we clink, let me just pick up this. I'm so sorry. He picks up the phone call.
Talk about chills. I have the chills now when you're telling this story.
And he got the call that his immediate commander was just killed. And he was the one to get the phone call because that was just the protocol of how they did it after next of kin. The way he transformed from getting emotional and just living in that moment of my world is colliding and everything is just falling apart, but right now I have to pick it back up and get back to the l'chaim.
That's Israel. I remember the night of my wife and I were celebrating our second wedding anniversary, so I arranged to get rid of the kids, had a nice bottle of wine, nice music, and the phone rang, and I put it on speaker. And it was a friend of mine who's a military rabbi, and he said, "We need you at Har Herzl." And I said, "Why?" He said, "We have too many bodies, and we need you to help dig the graves." So I said, "Why are you calling me?" And he said, "Because I know you'll keep your mouth shut." So I was kind of trying to explain to him that, this is a special night for me and my wife, and all of a sudden I see my wife walk into the bedroom with a thermos of coffee and Tehillim, and she says, "Go, they need you more than I do right now." So transformed. And I spent the night on Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, the military cemetery, with a complete cross-section of Israel. There were no arguments, there were no political debates, nothing. From guys full of tattoos and metal piercings all the way over to Haredim. I was filling the white sandbags. And as the sun came up, I looked at one of the coffins, and I knew the guy. And it was very difficult at that moment to kind of balance out my joy of celebrating my wedding anniversary with a wonderful woman, with the loss of a wonderful guy with 6 children and a loving wife. But I wasn't really angry or depressed at the situation. It's war. But I was depressed and very, very angry at the people who led us into this trap, because that man should have been alive. He should have been able to go home to his wife and children, and he should have lived a wonderful life. He was a professional soldier, but he should have had the chance to have a full life, and that was taken from him. And that also is part of Israel. It's not that the enemy takes our lives. We're accustomed to that. What we're not accustomed to is having our loved ones offered up as a sacrifice by our presumed betters in the government and the military. That man should not have died, but he was betrayed and abandoned by the same people that betrayed and abandoned me. On October 7th, my security phone rang. It's a Shabbat. I was getting ready to go across the street for Shabbat services, and I have to answer it because it's glowing red. So and it was the telegram, the Nukba GoPro of what they were doing. And my wife looked at it and she said, this is sick. What is this, like Fauda? I mean, is this a movie? And I said, no, it's real. And she started crying. And at that moment, my life changed. How so? Up until that moment, I had assumed that I was the exception to the rule. My abandonment and betrayal was an outlier. But what I realized on October 7th, watching those videos, those horrible videos, was that the entire country had been abandoned and betrayed. And that's when things began to change for me in terms of the possibility of me going political or having any association with the political process, aka the swamp in Israel. So you go from moments of joy, I'm getting ready to celebrate Shabbat, to absolute fear and anger and a feeling of nakama, of revenge for what happened. I have refused to wear a yellow hostage pin because the whole movement, the left has taken over. And I warned certain people about that. They changed from being anti-judicial reform to, pro-hostage, to get them out, to prioritize the rescue of the hostages to the exclusion of everything else. And it was meant specifically to undermine the credibility of our conservative coalition government. So I didn't wear a hostage pin. And when confronted I remember one instance near Kikar Paris, where they used to gather in Jerusalem. They left this woman came up, American, Anglo, was screaming at me, "Where is my hostage pin?" So I looked at her and I just said, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, did you wear a pin for me?" And she said, "No, why should I? You're a fascist." Okay? That was, and I thanked her for her candor on that. So I wore a pin that said Nakama, because the yellow pin reminded me of the yellow star, that in this case, the enemy made us wear. And I refused to do that. My position on the hostages was quite controversial here. It didn't gain me any friends or allies, but I tell the truth. And I related a story always of a submarine commander in war whose submarine is damaged by enemy action and the boat's going down. His responsibility as commander of the boat is to rescue the boat, keep the boat and as many of the crew as possible alive. So in some cases that you have to close off the damaged part of the ship, in this case a boat, and sacrifice the few in order to guarantee the lives of the many. And this was a concept that just people could not understand here because they've been brainwashed. And to the point where they don't understand what it takes to fight terrorists. You cannot validate the taking of hostages, because what we've done now is just that. We validated the taking of hostages. And no Jew now is safe anywhere in the world because of that. So, again, it's a controversial thing. I did a lot of videos for the right-wing families, Tikva. And they were about bringing their loved ones back through strength. So, as I said, I didn't get any friends or allies by my position, but sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to step back, and this is why we elect leaders, to make those hard decisions. But unfortunately, we lack those types of leaders right now.
I just wanted to jump in and ask you a question about that, because I remember reading that when you said, I think the quote was something along the lines of maybe who knows, because the media says what they want to say, but it came across as something along the lines of the hostage families should be put in detention camps or detention centers
Yeah,
or something.
no. What happened was this was on Channel 14,
Yeah.
and they take a lot of liberties, especially with me because I'm not a bibista. I'm not a Benjamin Netanyahu,
Right.
supporter. So no, what I said was that if the leaders of the left wing, the Hostage Family Forum, and some of the family members themselves don't shut up, because they were undermining our ability to prioritize winning the war. And the worst thing, they were going overseas and mobilizing enemies of ours, ostensibly to help the hostages, but their objective was to undermine our ability to prosecute and win this war. I said the quote I used, and Israel can sometimes be a very provincial place to live. I said, quoting Cicero, and I quoted the Latin, which I won't do now, but it was, in times of war, the law is silent. And in this case, these particular family members and the movement itself, left-wing movement, were aiding and abetting the enemy.
So I get all that, and that makes sense. And I think everyone in Israel, I think there's a misconception that in Israel you have people who want the hostages to come home and people who don't want the hostages to come home. That's of course false. Every Israeli, every Jew wants two things. We want to win the war and eradicate Hamas, and we want to bring the hostages home. And the question is, the political question becomes, how do you prioritize one over the other? And some people prioritize winning the war. Some people prioritize bringing the hostages home. I happen to have been more on the side of prioritizing winning the war. I have sons that are soldiers. I don't want my sons to go in and fight and be
I asked
and be held back from being able to
correct
fight because of this. So my question for you is, did anything change in your mind? Did anything change in your heart, let's say, when you watch those hostages come home to their families last week? Because for me, even as somebody who did prioritize the war over the return of the hostages, I have to be honest, I sat there and I cried, and I couldn't help but cry when I saw what was going on. And part of me said to myself, maybe this really did need to happen for the country to be able to heal and move forward. And even though logically it makes no sense, and yes, we empowered.
No, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. If anything, later, I felt rage over this hysterical optimism that ensued. It's like people are so depressed and so discouraged and so fearful that they'll grasp at any reason to feel good. Well, I didn't survive 30 years in prison living according to those beliefs. I look at things very cold and crystallized. And what I saw reminded me of a defeated nation getting their prisoners of war back by surrendering. That's what I saw. I'm sorry to say this, but on October 8th, I was asked by certain people, for my opinion on what we should do, because when I came home, I had briefed a scenario. I used to be on a red team, what they call it in Washington, and the enemy team. And I briefed a war in Gaza, and one of the former chiefs of staff said, "What are you wasting our time for? We are never going back into Gaza." And I said, that's a recipe for defeat, if you think so, because the enemy has a vote. So I gave a scenario. Full confession, I never imagined them coming across the border and taking hostages. Okay, so I said we have to prioritize winning the war. And I said I feel that the Prime Minister should make a public announcement to Hamas. You either return our living hostages and the remains of the dead ones within 24 hours, or there will be nothing left from Jabalia in the north to Rafah in the south. The largest, tallest building will be an anthill. I have always opposed urban warfare because it devalues the lives of soldiers. It's a horrible, horrible mode of fighting. I've studied Stalingrad. The worst one was Manila, believe it or not, in 1945. It was a meat grinder. And we can't afford it. I mean, if you're being utilitarian about it, we can't afford to lose soldiers. We can't. And for me, the most sacred individuals in Israel, above and beyond the Rabbonim and the Tzaddikim and the Mikubalim, are the men and women that put on a uniform to defend us. We owe them everything. And yes, another controversial statement I've made was that the most effective killer of Israeli soldiers are the rules of engagement, promulgated by leftists and enforced by judicial commissars down to the company level. I don't care about the enemy. I am not my enemy in the sense that I would authorize just the indiscriminate killing of civilians, but I will not send soldiers into a building that has a target because they're civilians, enemy civilians. I won't do it. I'll take the building out because those men and women are my brothers and sisters, and I will not squander their lives on the altar of some political correctness. I'm not going to do that. I remember a busload of young paratroopers, Tanchanim, stopped. I was coming back from Malava Melka. I sobered up immediately. And they all piled out, and they were surrounding me. Most of them were Anglo. And they asked me, what is it like to be in combat? What is it like to have people shooting at you? What is it like to be scared? And I looked at them, and I told them a story that my father told me before. I'm from the Vietnam generation. And he said, to whom do you owe your loyalty as an officer? Who do you owe? And I said, the commander-in-chief. He said, no. The Congress, no. The flag, no. The Constitution, I mean, that's what we swore to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. He said, no. I said, how about my commanding officer? And my father said, oh, hell no. He was a cavalry officer from 1932-33, veterinarian, then human doctor. He said, you owe your loyalty, unqualified loyalty, to the man at that time, the man on either side of you. And if the orders you receive compromise them to any degree, he said, I'll be proud to visit you in the stockade, in the military prison. Those are the people you owe your loyalty to. So I told them this. And their officer wasn't too happy with but he really wasn't happy with what I did next. I said, do you all have the Purity of Arms, a little pamphlet? And they said, yes. I said, let me see them. And I got about 50 of them. And I said, I'm going to do something right now that I hope will save your lives. And I went over to a trash can and threw them all away. I said, everything in there is an avodah zarah. There's nothing Jewish at all in there. We're given our orders from Torah. We understand how we fight from Torah, not from that. I said, have you guys read that? Yeah. They said, yeah. I said, do you agree with any of it? No. I said, so forget about it. Shoot straight, shoot to defend the guy or woman on either side of you, and fight Al Kiddush Hashem, because you're fighting God's war right now. So they got on the bus. They looked a little bit relieved, and the officer came up to me and said, I've sent a message that you have nothing more to do with talking to soldiers. And I said, well, hopefully a Hamas sniper will save me the effort of doing the same for you.
Wow.
So he didn't like that, but I didn't care. So, yes, there are moments where you get a phone call and you're in another reality. You're a totally different reality. But that's one foot in that. The other foot is getting ready to say l'chaim. And you have to somehow balance or merge both of them. I was at a soldier's levaya in which the mother jumped into the kever, screaming. And I was standing back from the grave, and all I heard was the voice coming out of the grave. and some guys jumped in and got her out. But we as a people have not waited 2,000 years to be offered up as korbanot by our betters, presumed betters. I can honestly say that I've never shaken the hand of any terrorists or their representatives. I have pulled a trigger on quite a few of them, but I've never shaken their hands. I never will. People here for some reason, and it's because of the indoctrination of the media and our presumed elected leaders. They're not elected, they're chosen by the political party. We don't have really accountable representation here, as we understand it, say, from the United States, where you can go into a congressman's office or a senator's office and hold the guy responsible or woman responsible for her actions. You can't do that here. So, for me, one of my goals, if I ever get elected, is to make sure that we have a different way of electing people in this country, where we have accountability in the Knesset. We don't have it right now. We just don't have it. Our educational system is wretched. Our judicial system is appalling. I was in court a couple of days ago with my wife on another matter, a family matter, and I was sickened by the attitude of the judge. Misogynistic. He hated women, no question, and he was open about it. But this rot runs through the entire judicial system. How can you say we have a democracy? We have a juristocracy. I think that's the way I put it. Unelected judges from one side of the political spectrum who feel that they have the right to dictate to us and override the will of our democratically elected legislature. This is not a democracy. So I was asked to meet with 4 officers, Air Force officers, in the height of the anti-judicial reform protests, coup d'etat, which is what it was. And I took them to lunch at a very nice restaurant. And I asked them a very simple question. I said, you guys have all said you're not going to fly, the reservists. You're not going to fly if the judicial reform package is passed, correct? Yes. Okay. I said, would you agree that you would fight for the land and people of Israel, irrespective of the government? Just for the land and people of Israel. I didn't say Al Pi Torat Yisrael. I left that out, right? Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael. That's my philosophy. But I left Al Pi Torat out, and they said no. It kind of shocked me. So I said to them, okay, I have just 3 questions left for you. Did we have a free and fair election? And they answered yes. I said, did you guys win? And they said, no. I said, so you lost, right? Yes. Okay, can you get over that? No. And I said, why not? And they said, because people like you don't know how to run a 21st century government. And I said, what are people like me? Who are you referring to? They said, this whole God thing. Oh, I said, oh, well, thank you. That makes it all clearer. So I said, would you excuse me? I have to go to the men's room. And, the food was coming. So I got up and I walked around and talked to the maitre d', whom I know. And I said, you see those 4 guys there? He said, yeah. I said, they're going to pay for their meals. I have another appointment I have to run to. So later that night, I got a call from one of them screaming at me. How could you do this to us, that you promised to pay for our meal and you disappeared and we had to pay for the meal? I said, well, I guess I'm just kind of stupid. I don't know how to run a 21st century government.
Wow. I have to tell you that, part of our podcast and the things that we do is learning from other people and growing with them and hearing the messages. And already, such a short time in, I'm already getting so much of that. But I need to step a little bit back because I did tell you that I grew up with your face on our refrigerator and the Free Pollard. I just want to understand a little bit who you are. Like, who were you when you were 10 years old? Where did you grow up? If you don't mind, give me a little bit of the background. Who are you as a person? Did you grow up religious? Did you grow up in New York? I know nothing. I only know after Free Pollard and it happened and we celebrated. But I'd love to know, and especially for my audience who's listening, how'd you grow up? How did you get into the spy business?
Well,
How did you?
The short story was
yeah.
I was born, I had a Brit Milah, I had a Bar Mitzvah, I went to college, almost made it to Vietnam.
You're that young.
Was in prison for 30 years, lost my wife here in Israel when she got me home, remarried a friend of hers with 7 children, which I didn't know about. 7 children, 6 girls, and here I am.
Okay, great. But we got to step back a little bit. We got to step back.
Okay.
After your bris.
after my
yes.
my Brit.
After your Brit,
Well,
right, exactly.
Before my Brit,
Yeah.
you should understand that my family...
Yeah, where are they from? Who
Yeah.
are you? Yeah.
Who
yeah.
am I? I'm a product of the past, obviously.
Yes, of course.
My distant ancestor was the Gra,
Wow.
the Vilna Gaon through my mother. It was a direct line. And it's strange because a lot of my views, especially on Aliyah, religious Aliyah, can be traced right back to what he proposed back in the 1700s. I grew up in Texas, Galveston, Texas to be exact. So I'm not really an American, I'm a Texan.
Love it.
That explains a lot.
Yeah,
Yes,
that does
yes,
explain a lot.
yes.
Every you know.
Okay, good. Take me now to your bar mitzvah.
No, before my bar mitzvah,
Yeah.
every boy, when I was growing up, and I'm a little bit older than I think both of you, every boy on his 10th birthday got a gun. In my case, a rifle. And my father, who was a high-ranking Army officer and a doctor and a research scientist, gave me the only advice on gun safety that has ever seemed to be logical in my mind, which is if you're going to point the gun at somebody, pull the trigger. If you're not, don't point the gun at them. And in Texas, this was heresy.
Yeah.
But I grew up with that. And then eventually my father took a position at the University of Notre Dame, which was a cultural shock for me because the Catholic university, and it was in the north. And when I was in school in Texas, we didn't learn about the Civil War. We learned about the War of Northern Aggression. And every morning when we put hand on heart, we didn't have Abraham Lincoln. We had Sam Houston. We didn't have the Stars and Stripes. We had the Lone Star flag, and we sang The Eyes of Texas, and all the Mexican kids sat in the back and were quiet. That's where I grew up, in the South.
Keep going.
I never experienced any anti-Semitism in Texas. When you have a Second Amendment enforced, even down to 10 years old, you tend to watch your mouth very carefully around people. So I never experienced anything. It's not to say I didn't experience it up north. It was very bad for me. I was usually the only Jewish kid in class, in school. And my father basically said, you got to tough it out. And it was hard as a young boy.
As a teenager?
No, before that.
Oh, even before that?
Before that. Fighting, a mob of anti-Semites. But my father told me, pick one and make sure he doesn't come back again. So I did that. And finally he gave me a knife.
How'd you choose?
Yes. And finally he gave me a knife, which was the origin of my ability to use a knife, which saved my life on innumerable occasions in prison. And I cut somebody. And so I was brought into the principal's office, a drunk Irishman, anti-Semite, and he said, give me the knife. I took him literally. So I drove the knife into his $3,000 Herman Miller desk, and he screamed and call the police, and my parents showed up, and I'm just sitting there. I'm not really scared or embarrassed or anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're not a teenager yet, even.
No. Wow. And so my father came in. He was apprised of what happened, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you do this to put this knife in the desk?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." He said, "What did the desk do to you? You should have put it between the guy's eyes." So that's my dad, great guy. So I was excused from attending that school again, and I went to a Catholic school.
Wow.
St. Joseph's. And that was the beginning of my formal Jewish education, because they brought a rabbi in from Chicago, Orthodox, Skokie, to when the Catholic kids had catechism, and I was obliged to wear a kippah.
Do you remember who he was?
No, I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember. Young guy.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. Apparently, the Monsignor had warned everybody in the school that if there were any disrespectful remarks made to me, their hide would be worn out. And I was...
He's carrying a knife.
No, I was amazed at how violent the nuns were.
What?
I mean, I was scared to death of them. They would beat boys up right in the classroom. And, of course, the boys couldn't do anything. And what crime had they committed? Oh, they talked in class.
So you're saying the Rabbaim weren't the only one to hit us when we were...
No. These women with the big habits, I mean, it was incredible. Actually, fast forward, there was a time in the United States where if you were a pastor or somebody from the clergy, you could fly for half price. So I was flying from South Bend, Indiana, to San Jose. I was attending Stanford at the time. And so I said, well, this is crazy. It's $125. This is insane. So I went to the Notre Dame bookstore, and I bought a Roman Catholic shirt and pants with a collar and everything. And I had some cards made up, Father Jonathan Pollard, the Jesuit order, of Latter Jesus Christ, the whole thing. And I had a huge crucifix. I mean, it's something that gangster rappers use, but at the time it served the purpose. And I went up at the United desk, and she looks at me and she says, Father? And I gave her the card. Pollard. I said, yes. And she said, okay, we're going to let you fly for 50%. And I said, thank you, my daughter. And I was feeling really good about myself.
This sounds like the first time you were a spy.
No, the first time I was a spy, I really don't want to go into that. My sister hates me to this day.
For something you did then?
I was a little kid.
What was it?
I caught her doing something, and I ran to my mother and father, and I said, I want a room now. And my father said, you never inform a rat on your family. And that's when I learned the idea of you never Moser a Jew. And I was punished. Not my sister. So I learned that when you're an agent, you better know what you're saying and to whom you're saying it. So at any rate, I'm standing there feeling very good about myself, and there's a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there is the provost of the University of Notre Dame, priest. And he says, Father Jonathan. And I said, yeah. And he picked up the cross. He picked up the cross off my chest, and he said, never say that Jesus Christ didn't do anything for you. And he laughed. My mother was incandescent. My father thought it was pretty funny, but my mother, she was a strict Yankee from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And my father was off a dairy farm in upstate New York on Hudson River. And so I was in college, mechanical engineering.
What did you think you wanted to do then?
I wanted to be a naval architect. I wanted to design warships. And designing warships is as much about the technology of buoyancy and strength coefficients and things like that as it is the aesthetics of the ship. And I remember one of my professors giving us an example of this, of a destroyer, the stacks. And he said, what is this? This is a warship, right? And we all, he said, no. He put another slide up, and this was a Russian warship. The same class, same tonnage. But it had something different. It had a more pronounced bow, raked bow, and the funnels were tilted, and they had what was called Dracula's capes on them, ostensibly to funnel the smoke away from the aft of parts of the ship, but it gave the impression of speed to the ship, along with the bow. And he said, this is how aesthetics scare the enemy, because he said, this looks dangerous. And we all nodded our head. He said, remember that when you design a warship. So eventually the war was over, came home, and I didn't know what to do. You owe the Navy 4 years. I'm on reserves. So I called my mother from San Diego, the payphone.
Collect call?
No, I had change. They would have accepted it. But,
Yeah.
and I said, Mom, I'm home. Oh, Baruch Hashem. Okay. So I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, well, you're going to go to law school now. I said, I never applied. She said, no, I did. She got my transcripts. She got my LSAT scores. And she applied. She wrote the essays. And she applied to all these law schools that I got into. So I was horrified. And I said, where am I going? And she said, oh, Notre Dame. She said, you can go there for free. Get a free law degree because your dad teaches there. But she said, you're going to be in your old high school room, and you're going to have you have to come home with your father from school. You can't go out. There are no girls, no drinking, no smoking, nothing. And at 9 o'clock, we're having tea and pastry, and you're going to continue working until 11 when it's lights out. And I said, I'm back in hell. So I said, is this what you had in store for me? She said, well, I told you a long time ago that you had 3 options for employment. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a plumber. And I said, why a plumber? And she said, well, remember the time where we had some pipe problems in the kitchen and you were bent down on your hands and knees trying to fix the pipes and everything? I said, yeah. She said, well, I looked down and I said, that's the tuchus of a plumber.
You have the head for a lawyer and the tuchus for a plumber.
Yeah, tuchus for a plumber. So after a year, I was reactivated, and I went to MIT for naval ship architecture. And the first ship I designed, this was before computers. And so we had to use a slide rule. And, so the professor, who was an admiral, old guy, did the numbers himself, and he said, your ship was buoyant for less than a minute after it took a torpedo and it turned turtle, and the entire crew died. What do you have to say for yourself? So I looked at all the other young aspiring naval architects there, and I said, my men died with honor. And he said, no, Mr. Pollard, they didn't. They died screaming for their mothers. So redesign the ship, which Baruch Hashem was good. Growing up, it was a typical schizophrenic Jewish life. My parents were not Orthodox. They were traditional. So my mother had a glatt kosher kitchen. Anything that came into that kitchen, she had to look at to make sure there was an acceptable hechsher. The meat had to come from a kosher butcher shop. Make sure that he didn't put the thumb on the scale when he cut the meat. I didn't believe it until I saw it.
It actually happens.
Yeah, it actually happened. But we would go out and have shrimp cocktail.
Interesting.
Or meat or chicken. I mean, we never had pork ever. I've never had pork at all. I've never mixed meat and milk. We were always Shomer Shabbos, stay home. And but there was a little bit of schizophrenia. I mean, we would drive to the shul with everybody else. It was what I call a conservadox shul. So we had a mechitza, everything. But the parking lot was closed, and we would park down the street along with everybody else. There was no eye contact made, no Shabbat Shalom, nothing, just head down. And we would walk to shul, heads held high, like we were virtuous. You know, we were Shomer Shabbos. No, we weren't.
Were you Shomer Shabbos in prison? Is that when you started becoming more observant?
What happened in prison?
I know I'm jumping a little bit.
No, it's okay. I was asked initially I disappeared for 6 weeks. Nobody knew where I was after my arrest. And the question I was asked before my rendition, I think I might have been the first person to have been renditioned before 9/11 and what happened with the Taliban and the ISIS guys that were Al Qaeda guys that were treated this way. I was asked two questions: Who are your team members? How are they getting out of the country? And I don't know. Okay, and then they put a list in front of me. This was within the second day of all the major Jewish leaders, American Jewish leaders. They said, just put a check next to them, all of them. I said, why? And they said, well, you're confirming their involvement with your espionage activities. And I immediately understood that this was an effort to decapitate the American Jewish leadership. And so I said, no, you don't mosa another Jew. Maybe in a kosher bed din you can tell the truth, but for the goyim, you keep quiet. So that night, I was knocked out, bag over the head. I don't know where we were. We were up in the mountains because it was cold, very cold. And I was in a stone cell, no clothes. And for 6 weeks, I was asked the same questions. You're going to sign, not. I knew that if I signed, they'd kill me because you don't want someone like me coming into the court beaten up, tortured, and, having had his confession, if you will, or testimony coerced. So I'm not going to sign that under anything. So for 6 weeks, my back was broken in 4 places. I have a plate in my head right now. My ankles, my toes, my knees, my hips, fingers, wrists, elbows, shoulders, everything was broken, and I was raped for 6 weeks during that whole time. And a rabbi, a Rav here in Yerushalayim, asked me, what were you davening for? Well, I wasn't really davening. I was just asking God to either let me die quickly or just keep my mouth shut. And luckily, he kept my mouth shut. Many years later, I was in our house here in Yerushalayim, and the Mossad came to see me. And Esther, Aleyha Shalom, was sitting next to me. I hadn't told her about this. She didn't know where all the injuries came from, but she didn't press the issue. So I was asked to co-sign or countersign a document that I had not talked. They had already signed it. So I just, turned the page. I'm looking at what's there, and it was everything that was done to me. So I asked them naively, how do you know this? How do you know all this? They said, oh, well, we signed off on it. You were Hefka, We didn't really think you'd live. And here you are, so you have to sign this. This is why I'm under the protection of the Shabak and not the Mossad. They still have an issue with me. And it's not me personally. It was a conflict, interagency conflict, between the organization I work for, LACAM, which is an activity of the Ministry of Defense, and the Mossad, competing agencies. And they just used my arrest as a means of destroying a competing sister agency in Israel, which still exists, by the way. So when they brought me back to Washington, my lawyers finally found me. The judge just looked at me and said, I understand, this is in a closed courtroom, I understand that you slipped in the shower. And I said, no, Your Honor, I slipped twice. He said, well, you're a smart boy, you just keep that story. So after I was sentenced.
Wait, can we just back up for 1 second? Because I know, like, you're the first spy I've ever met. Have you ever met another spy?
No.
Do you have any young children?
Official, professional spy.
Yeah.
And
They can be pretty professional.
First of all, I want to
Do
see
you know
your-
my first espionage case?
What was that?
With your sister.
No, actually, it happened before then. I'm just remembering it. I was a little boy. I was losing my milk teeth at this point. And my mother, alayhi salam, said, put your tooth in an envelope under your pillow, and the tooth fairy will come. So I woke up the next morning, and there was a quarter. And I said, no, this, it just struck me as being inadequate. So I came down the stairs with my dog, and I sat at the table, and my mother said, what did the tooth fairy bring you? And I said, nothing. The tooth fairy doesn't exist. And I saw my father look at me, and my mother looked at my father, and she said, I promise you the tooth fairy will come tonight. So, woke up the next morning, and there were 2 quarters there. And then I understood, okay, I know this game, okay. So I came down the stairs crying, and I slipped up onto my seat, and my father's looking at me. And my mother said, what did the tooth fairy bring you? I said, I don't believe in the tooth fairy. She didn't bring me anything. And my father put his hands out, because he knows he's going to get hell, looking at my mother, shaking his head, and she looked at him, and she said, the tooth fairy will come tonight. Won't she? My father said, yes. So the next morning I woke up and there was $1. I'm rich. I'm going to buy comics. I'm going to buy bubble gum. I'm going to buy all my friends Kool-Aid. Everything is great. For $1. It's rich.
Yeah.
So it's $1.75.
Oh, right.
Okay. You got to keep track of these things. So I came down and I got up on my seat looking rather sad, and my mother said, what did the tooth fairy, like an interrogator, what did the tooth fairy bring you last night? And before I could say anything, my father got up and he said, the blankety blank tooth fairy gave you $1 last night, didn't she? And I said, yeah. Yeah, she did. So I learned the limits of deception at that point.
So your career started early. But as far as professional spies, you're the first one I've ever met. And maybe later you'll show us your exploding pen and your shoe camera and all the cool gadgets that we all know you must have. But what is espionage? What does that mean? I mean, what did you do? What happened? I'm just like, I don't even really understand what that even means. What was the process? How
Let's rewind back there. So you're in Notre Dame.
And who ratted you, by
How
the
did you
way?
get recruited? This is the part.
I wasn't recruited.
This is the part that I'm curious about.
Yeah. What happened?
Thank you.
Was I was placed. I was in the Middle East for quite a while doing certain things. I was in New York actually before that for quite a while.
Well, you're designing ships at this point.
No,
That's where we're back to.
I wasn't at that point.
Right.
Because the war on terror had begun, and because I was from Texas and knew how to handle a gun, and didn't seem to care too much about killing people. And I tried to explain to the Navy guys talking to me that, if you're a professional soldier or sailor, you have to be prepared to kill. And they said, no, you seem to like to kill. And I said, where did you get that? They needed bodies, so, they put me down as somebody they could depend on. So I was a year and a half in New York, absolute mayhem. No Miranda rights, nothing. Just target, eliminate, and then I went to Europe for a while, and then the Middle East.
Working on behalf of the government.
Yes.
In the Navy.
Yes.
Doing missions.
Yeah.
Whatever mission they would give you.
Whatever they would give me. Okay.
Anything that you're allowed to talk about?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And that's for a very good reason.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. I don't want the Shabak or the Mossad
No,
after
it's
me.
not
so-
only that.
Yeah.
There's some really bad people out there
Yeah.
who have long memories. I didn't appreciate the U.S. attorney during my sentencing informing the whole world that I was the Israeli intelligence officer that put together the raid on the PLO headquarters in Tunis in October 1985 that was designed to kill Arafat. Somebody talked here and alerted him.
Wow, and that came out there, and
And
you
it
had
came,
no choice.
and I
Yeah.
looked at the prosecutor and I said, "Thanks for putting a bullseye on my back."
Wow.
And because 91 of them, of the 417 guys, had died in the airstrike, and he said, "You don't have anything to worry about. You're never getting out of prison." Well, when I came home, I was informed on TV that the PA had put a $1 million bounty on my head, and I guess it was typical of me. I just kind of sat there for a second, and the interviewer said, "Do you have anything to say about that?" I said, "Yeah, I'm worth a little bit more than that."
Jaime, you do have security outside, right?
Yes,
We're
I hope
safe
so. Well, thank God we all believe in Hashem here, so we're protected by that.
No, I do.
But you're serving missions. You're doing.
Okay, so what happened
Yeah.
was I was put. Nobody knew I was Jewish. I mean, I didn't eat pork. How did I explain that? I'm a vegetarian.
Sure.
And nobody, so I'm weird. I'm a vegetarian. Okay, fine. I was put on the team that was handling the U.S.-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement. And it's a quid pro quo. We would give information to Israel, or Israel would give information to us. We would do evaluations, respectively, hand it back, whatever.
I apologize for someone that's a little bit of an unknown in this world. So this is in what part of the time frame is this?
This was about 1983.
So in the early 80s, there
Right.
was something going on between U.S. and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you can explain to me a little bit more about what was happening at that
I mean,
time?
it was publicly known at
Yeah,
the time
yeah.
that we were, the U.S., I have trouble with pronouns sometimes, that the U.S. and Israel were exchanging intelligence
Okay.
on various things. And what happened just before that was we, in Israel, raided the Iraqi nuclear reactor. Now, my involvement in that, I cannot confirm or deny. Okay, I want to be. I don't like lying, but I don't like telling stories that I'm not supposed to. So, I can neither confirm or deny my alleged involvement in this raid.
Okay.
So, right after that raid, Caspar Weinberger, who was the then Secretary of Defense, and Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who had moved from the director of the National Security Agency to the deputy director of the CIA, a Sonai Israel of the worst order, were outraged that we had used some of the material from the intelligence exchange to carry out the raid. You're welcome. So, luckily, my involvement with that wasn't quite known because there were a lot of people involved with the exchange at the time. So they swore blood revenge. Why? Because the Israelis had angered one Middle East ally at the time, Saudi Arabia. So what happened was there was an undeclared intelligence embargo that was enacted. And by the way, this all came out in the open, and this is why I can talk about it, when Admiral Bobby Ray Inman was going to be nominated. I believe it was for the Secretary of Defense. And this issue came out, and he went postal on a press conference explaining the whole thing. I mean, if I had said half of what he said, I would have gotten additional charges. But he helped me. I mean, he just laid it all out as the genesis, the bereshit of what happened with my involvement with the Israelis. So I'm seeing, a list of things we're supposed to exchange, and I am only in possession of a fraction of it. So I went up the chain all the way to the Secretary of Defense's office saying, what the hell's going on? And they said, just, if they have a problem with an enemy system, let them lose a couple of airplanes and they'll figure it out. They're smart Jews. They'll figure it out. So I understood what was going on. And eventually it got to be too much. And I made contact. And it was clear that I had crossed a line. So I basically made Aliyah. I had citizenship long before it was officially acknowledged that I had had it. I had a Tudat Zahut. I paid taxes, everything. Did I receive a salary? Yes, just like CIA agents who receive two salaries, one officially and the other one from whatever their cover business is. I paid taxes on it. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And I'll give you an example of something. At one point, we got information. This was before we had satellites, reconnaissance satellites here, the OFEC series in Israel. And so we heard information that there was a massive chemical warfare plant built in a place called Samarra in Iraq. This is during the Iran-Iraq War. And there was an official team coming to the United States to determine whether that was so. But I was tasked to determine whether there actually was something there. So the team, we met in a safe house, and the team came to see me and said, well, we were assured by everyone in the Pentagon that these are just rumors. Okay. So I took them into another room where I had laid out the mosaic, the pictures of the largest chemical warfare plant in the world, built by the Bechtel Corporation, by the way, that Caspar Weinberger used to work for. It was a insecticide plant. That was the cover. And I remember one of my colleagues looked at this incredible facility and kind of rolled his eyes at me, and he said, you see, Jonathan, it's sometimes better to deal with reliable enemies than unreliable allies. And we had to fly 2 aircraft on that plant to verify it. And we lost one of the planes. And so 2 families that I visited when I came back was to apologize for the loss of their children, their husbands, because they died to protect me. So, there were no hard feelings. I mean, it's war. This is Israel. It's war. So, a spy, it's very difficult, actually, sometimes to remember who you are. Because my boss, Rafi Eitan, not the general, not the Ramatkal Rafi Eitan, may his memory be a blessing, but the stunk that directed Lacom at the time, he was known as Rafi the Stinker, and had a nasty habit of abandoning agents. I did not know that. So I was given my collection orders. Basically, all the documents were supposed to have been given to Israel under the terms and references of the U.S.-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement. And a couple of times he went off the derech asking me for political information, blackmail information that could be used on political leaders in Israel. And I said, no. And he wanted to know the identity of American agents in Israel. And I said, that's forbidden. I'm not going near that. And it was lucky I drew that line, because that you can get a death penalty for that. And he looked at me and said, okay, you can do that. All right. But he said, one of them is going to kill you. And one of them did. There was an agent, and a CIA agent on the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that ratted me out. If you ask if I had to do it over, would I still do what I did? And yes, I am not a traitor. My indictment says so. The indictment said that I was unauthorized, but I transmitted illegally transmitted national security information to a major non-NATO ally, parenthesis Israel, and in caps, without intent to harm. But two problems cropped up in my life at the time. One was the fact that there was a Soviet spy in the CIA. You might remember him, Aldrich Ames. He was a mole who was ordered by the 5th Directorate of the KGB to blame me for all the then ongoing deaths of American and Russian agents, and British agents, MI6 agents, that were dying in Russia because of his treason. And they compromised a low-level Soviet agent here in Israel to kind of prove the circle. You know, the information came here and it got transmitted somehow to the Russians or the Soviets. So one of the prosecutors came to see me at one point, long after I was sentenced, and he said, "Do you remember when the judge had you stand up and ask you if you had any remorse for all the deaths you'd caused?" I said, "Yeah, I remember that." He said, "What did you say?" I said, "Yes, I have remorse that there wasn't one more." He said, "Where was your mind? Where was your head?" And I said, "My head, my mind, it was in Tunis. We missed Arafat. That was the whole point of the operation." He said, "Well, that's not where the judge's mind was. The judge's mind was in the basement of the Lefortovo prison, KGB prison in Moscow." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, Aldrich Ames, who had just been caught, had gone into the judge's chambers, ex parte, it was illegal, and had described for the judge in excruciating detail how one of the CIA agents, General Igor Trechikov, had been fed feet first into a furnace in front of his family." And I said, "I didn't have anything to do with that." And he said, "Well, we know that now." But Ames was quite persuasive in pinning everything on you. So when the judge asked you, all he heard was you were sorry you didn't kill another U.S. agent. He said, "Did you notice how many security agents were in the courtroom that day?" I said, "I thought it was a bit excessive." And he said, "That's because there were a lot of CIA field operatives that had volunteered to come in and kill you in court for what you'd done." And I said, "I didn't have anything to do with that." And he said, "We know that now." So Senator Dennis DeConcini, who was then from Arizona, who was then the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, wrote a letter to Clinton, President Clinton. It was signed by everybody on the committee, saying that I should be released and sent home because I had been falsely accused in camera for a crime I didn't commit. And Clinton's response in writing, which I have, said that we know that now, but that Mr. Pollard had become too valuable as a bargaining chip with Israel. That's in writing.
Wow.
So the other problem I had was the fact that I don't know if you guys remember Iran-Contra.
No.
Oliver North, of course.
Oliver North, that's right. Well, one of the trips that I came home here, I was briefed into the program of selling weapons to Iran at a profit and then using the profit to arm the Contras in Nicaragua, which was illegal. It was illegal. So, okay, I did what I was, I'm a good soldier. I opened up bank accounts for them. This is where the origin of my bank account in Switzerland comes from. I opened up bank accounts for the American participants. And later in tax court, after I was sentenced, without a legal representative present, which was kind of weird. You're guilty, by the way, in tax court and have to prove your innocence. It's like the Code Napoleon. I come into this court in my jumpsuit, orange jumpsuit. I'd just been given a life without parole. I mean, And the three judges, all Jews, look at me and say, Mr. Pollard, you're in a lot of trouble. I said, yeah, tell me something I don't know. I just came from federal court across the street. So they said, well, we know about this bank account, but we don't know the names. We have the numbers, but we don't have the names. So things could go well for you if you give us the names. And they said, we have a document from the bank that said you had no withdrawal rights. You just deposited money. So we know this isn't yours, but we want the names. I said, I don't recollect. I can't remember. They said, why? They didn't mean anything to you. You're Israeli, they're American. I said, no, these are patriots. They didn't use that money for their personal gain. And they said, well, it was against the law. And I said, well, what I learned in law school was the law is an ass. And this is the real world, so I'm not. So the judges looked at me and they said, well, Jonathan, for the next 5 minutes, you're going to be a very rich man. And I said, why is that? And they said, because we're going to put you down as the owner of these bank accounts. I said, but you just told me. I had no withdrawal rights. They said, we make the rules in this courtroom. So they said, for 5 minutes, you're an extremely rich man. So I asked for two things. I said, could I have a cigarette? So I got a cigarette, and I'm smoking. And I suddenly looked up at them, and I said, can I assign any of the money to my mother or father or my family, or is that okay? And they said, no, Mr. Pollard, it's not okay. It's just a turn of phrase that you're the owner of the money. So I kept asking for cigarettes. So when I left, as the door closed behind me, I heard the marshal screaming that son of a bitch stole my pack of cigarettes. I just put it straight down, and yeah. So.
I have to ask you, because again, hearing and speaking to you with your amazing demeanor in terms of, just being so easy to speak to, good memory, calm, happy. I keep bumping into
Actually,
you.
the funny thing about the memory was they kept telling me in court that I have a photographic memory, that I should never be let out of prison because I can recall everything. And I remember looking at the judge, and the judge said, what? I said, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know my name. I don't know why I'm here. I mean, I was joking, and he said, okay, you're not on Johnny Carson right now. Shut up. So,
but as I'm curious, when you found out the news, I'd like to understand that process. You mentioned earlier something that I can't get out of my head. 6 weeks, no one knew where I was. I'm trying to understand what that means. I know there was a tremendously long article that you did recently in the past year where you discussed discussed the treatment that you had, a broken tooth that happened to you, amongst other things.
Well, you have to understand, the first prison I went to, they couldn't beat or rape the information out of me, so they put me in a special prison, which was 150 meters down.
If you don't mind, where were you when you first got arrested? Where was this? Where
Washington.
Physically, you were in Washington?
Washington, D.C.
You were at home, you were in a condo, you were in a hotel. What happened?
Let me back up for a second. When I realized that the walls were closing
That's
in,
what I'm asking, exactly.
I went back to Israel through a circuitous route, and I talked to Rafi Eitan at the time, and I said, look, I've given you everything that was required. Now reassign me. Let me retire from the Navy and just reassign me to Europe. It's hard to believe this, but I was actually selling weapons for this organization, Lacam, and they were taking the money for other projects. I mean, you don't put a guy like me in that kind of danger. Be that as it may. So he looked at me and he said, what's your code name? I said, Danny Cohen. He said, do you remember when I gave you that code name in Paris? And I said, yeah, and I told you, why did you give me that code name? You could call me Jaime Lipschitz for all I care, but why did you name me Danny Cohen? He said, well, as we told you, we had a Eli Cohen in Damascus, and now we have a Danny Cohen in Washington. He said, we told you that the risks to the respective agents' lives were the same. We knew that if you were caught, there was a high probability that they would kill you. So I said, yeah, and I told you at the time that that was bad karma. So he said, remember, I promised to get you out. I said, yeah, I remember that. He said, well, that promise still stays. It's a bald-faced lie. But he said, I'm going to tell you the same thing we told Eli Cohen when he came here and sat right where you are and said, the walls are closing in, they're on to me. He said, you have to go back for one last mission. The Syrians, in this case with me, the Syrians are planning a surprise attack on the Golan. We're not quite ready for that right now. But there's a piece of military equipment that they need from the Soviet Union that they need to get before they decide to go forward with this called a standing start offensive. And he said, the question you have to ask yourself is whether your life is more important than the lives of all your fellow citizens and the deployed army units on the Golan. And he explained some more things to me about what could happen if this occurred. And I had to make a decision. And I said, okay, I'll go back. That's what a soldier does.
Wow. At that point, you were able to stay in Israel?
Yeah.
And you could have avoided, technically?
Everything. I would have just retired, disappeared. Yeah. Wow. So I went back, and I have to admit there was a moment of hesitation on the plane where I just, for a moment, I just said, no, I have to stay. And then the plane moved. So it was too late.
And you're married at this point?
Yeah.
For how long?
A
few years?
Few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few years.
So you're heading back to Washington.
Back to Washington.
Walls are closing in. He's sending you on your final mission, so to speak, saying it's
right.
important.
And what happened was 2 days before I was arrested, there were some Israelis in town to meet me. They did not have diplomatic immunity. I was very concerned about that, but they decided to come see me for operational reasons. And I just had a feeling, and I came back very late at night, and I pushed the false ceiling up above my desk, and there was a camera. So the alarm bells went off, and my first instinct was to run. Not tell anybody, just run right then. But I couldn't because I didn't have the information yet that was needed. It was a direction, left or right, whether the equipment coming out of the Soviet Union in question was going to Libya, which was to the right, or going to Syria, which was to the left. So 2 days later, I got the information. And I was arrested later that night before I could transmit it.
Where were you when that happened?
In the parking lot.
In the parking lot where you lived?
Where I worked.
Oh, where you worked?
Where I worked. So some guy came up to me and put I could feel it was a shotgun in the back of my head. And I said, I sure hope you're police. And the guy put an FBI badge in front of me. I said, okay. He said, just put your hands up. He took my gun. And he said, gotta come back with me. I said, no problem. And they're trying to interrogate me, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?
Where did he take you to right then and there?
To an interrogation room in my building.
You knew where you were at that point?
Oh, yeah. I knew that I was going down the rabbit hole. And so I had a red-tipped cigarette that was a cyanide-tipped cigarette. And, I just thought at that moment, Jews don't commit suicide. We buy retail.
Oh, my gosh.
I just decided I'm not going to go this route.
You had it on you?
Yeah, it was a pack of cigarettes. Yeah, red tip. I put a red tip on it too. I'm not going to give this to a friend of mine,
Remind me not to bum a cigarette from you.
No,
my
I don't
goodness.
smoke anymore. So, officially. So, I realized it was over. So I asked if I could call my wife at the time, and which they allowed. And I mean, they're listening to me. She was part of the operation. And I gave her a code word en passant, in passing. I gave her a code word. And she said, okay, so goodbye? And I said, yeah, goodbye. They didn't figure out what was going on. They were listening to the conversation, but it was very quick and natural. So she dodged the FBI tail. She did what she was trained to do. And she warned the Israelis, get out. And she was supposed to go with them. But this is why usually they never have real husbands and wives on teams like this, because she came back. She should have gone with them. And when I saw her at the house, they were ransacking the house, I looked at her and I said, why are you here? And she said, I couldn't leave you. I said, well, we're both going to die then. I said, that doesn't make any sense. So that night, I knew the drill because I'd done it. I'd conducted operations like this. You leave the agent under suspicion free and watch where he goes, who he talks to, what he does. So I had a secret phone, landline, that was in the apartment, which they never found. And I called and I explained what happened very briefly. And they said, okay, you can call us tomorrow. Okay. So I went to work and I did what I was told to do.
This is after you were arrested?
Yeah. But I'm free.
Right, because this is the process.
The process.
I have to ask you, where's that hiding spot?
So
you could say none of your business.
Never believe where it was.
I want to hear it though.
No. Sorry, there's some things in this line of work.
You could just say none of your business.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Well, that is
just I'd have to kill you if I told you. That's all. So the next night I get the call and I said, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do. I've confessed to being a Pakistani spy. It's called misdirection. And I said, I'm ready for extraction. And that's when the ground fell out from under me. And the voice said, Rafi never put together a rescue plan for you, an extraction. He said, you're to come to the embassy tomorrow. I said, that's stupid. I already confessed to being a Pakistani spy. I mean, I had Pakistani money in the house. I had fake tickets on PIA to Islamabad. I had pictures photoshopped of me with certain Pakistani generals. I mean, it was all done. It was set, and I passed my polygraph. So much for the accuracy of a polygraph.
Well, you're a pro.
They're tricks. Okay. And they said, no, you come in tomorrow at this time. So I did. And there was only one tail behind me. Everybody else was at the Pakistani embassy, waiting at a helicopter and overhead. So we pulled into the embassy, and I, just looked around, and everybody had come out to see me, and I said, I'm home, right? Yeah, you're okay. And then a few minutes later, the chief of security came out, whom I knew and know, and he said, Jerusalem wants you to leave the embassy and come in the front door. And I'm looking up this driveway, and there are hundreds of agents, and there's a sniper and a helicopter, I'm waving at him, all this crap. And I said, I'm going to die if I go up there. He said, those are your orders. I said, why don't you just shoot me and just say you thought I was a terrorist and take my wife in. She was very sick. Anyways, I said, take her in and they'll let her go. He said, no, we don't have orders for that. You have to leave. So just before I got in the car, he held the door and he said, I need your last report, left or right. And I just, okay. I said, right, to Libya. And I said, repeat that. She did, and I told him some other things, which he repeated. And he said, Hatzlacha. I won't tell you what I responded to that. And so they arrested me when I got out. Since coming home, I've been led to believe that there is a very good probability that the person in Jerusalem that ordered my expulsion was a Soviet agent. They had to have me arrested to protect Ames. They had to do it. So I still don't know for sure. I don't know who it is. But it's a wilderness. To paraphrase an author who wrote an interesting book on the National Security Agency, or no such agency, it's a wilderness of mirrors, literally. So eventually I went to this prison, and the commander looked at me, the warden looked at me, and he said, you see the grass, the sky, fresh air. I'm thinking, what is the matter with this guy? Who's a Goliath of a man, former Marine. And he said, when you come out, you'll be in two forms. You'll either be alive because you've agreed to cooperate, or you'll be an old man in a body bag. Okay? So I just, for the first time, it was like a bat kol that came out of my mouth. I said, you know what? You don't run the world. God does. I don't know why I said it. So he looked down at me and said, well, we'll see. So this elevator took me down very slowly. I mean, it's a psychological thing. They want you to feel the bore, the pit. And I got down, and there were 31 other men there. I never saw them, but there were 31 doors, and they were all in there for the same reason. They weren't talking. And so they put me in this cell that was 3 square meters. So you can figure out how much space I had. Just put down 3-meter sticks by 3-meter sticks by 3-meter sticks. You couldn't stand up in there. And slammed the door. Light never went off. Nothing to read, nothing to write, no visits, no phone calls, nothing. You're buried alive. So I sat there on this little tiny plank that was the bed of concrete. And I had my first conversation with God. And I apologized for not talking to him ever before. But I said, things are kind of tough for me right now. So there are no atheists in a foxhole. I just assumed God had a sense of humor, he made women. He had to have a sense of humor, so whatever. Did I say that?
Edit that, Michael.
Yeah.
No editing.
Yeah, okay. No, don't edit it. It's who I am is what
So
I am.
this is, sorry, just so the sequence of events. This is how many days after you got arrested? This
is 2 years later.
is 2 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the place that you were going to spend the rest of your life.
My life in. So I said to Hashem, I said to God, look, just like Avram Avinu when he negotiated for the survival of Sodom and Gomorrah, I said, look, if I stop doing these 10 bad things, and I thought about it, and I said, 8, and 6, and then I settled on 5, and God agreed, 5. And I start doing these 5 good things, save me. And that was it. And so the first meal I had, I threw up because the meal, I don't know what it was. I hoped it was dog food because dog food is sterilized. And it was the same meal I had 3 times a day, no variation. And so one day the door opened. I never left the cell. There was a toilet in there, a little toilet, a little sink for water. And they said, come. So I came out, and first thing I said was, what year is it? And it was 7 years later. And I said, okay, are my mother and father alive? Because they were very poorly at the time. And they said, yeah, they're alive. So first time I said, Baruch Hashem. So I looked down the hall, and all the doors were open, and I said, what happened to them? And they said they all committed suicide. So I said, I'm the lone survivor? And they said, yeah, we can't afford to keep this place open for just you. So that was the second time I said, Baruch Hashem. So I got on the elevator, and I literally came into the light. And guess what? There's the same warden. And I have a problem sometimes with time and place. This was the wrong time, and it was definitely the wrong place. I'm shackled. I'm handcuffed behind my back. And I just went up to him. I looked at him, and I said, you see, God runs the world, not you. And he knocked me out, knocked a tooth out of my head, which I still have. And when I kind of came to, I was laughing. The blood was all over me, I could taste it. And he was trying to finish me off, and they were holding him back. I was smart enough not to say anything to him at that point, but I just thought, wow, I made that guy really mad. And I was happy about it. So the next prison, the last prison I went to, I had never heard of before either. It was in the South, in North Carolina. And the first I got there, and the warden said, there are 5,000 inmates here. Nobody's going home. So you're going to wear this. It was a red T-shirt, so you're condemned. He said, let me ask you two questions. Are you going to talk? And I said, no. He said, good, don't. Your time will go better. Don't talk. And he said, do you have a knife? I said, what is this, a trick question? I said, no, I don't. And he handed me one. And he said, you're going to need it today. You know how to use that? I said, yeah, I know how to use one. He said, well, you're going to definitely have to use it today. Don't hesitate. And I said, okay, and he was right. So I spent the next 23 years there, kind of in a military section. My roommate was Delta Force. He was an assassin. And he also had been abandoned and betrayed. So we had a kind of a bond in common. And we watched each other's back. They didn't lock the doors. So there were a lot of people getting killed at night. So we put a tripwire up, and one would stay awake in the dark with a knife, and then after an hour, they'd wake the other guy up and they'd switch. So for 23 years, I never slept. I mean, it was just what you had to do there. And some of the hardest time I did was when they moved somebody in next door to me by the name of Bernie Madoff. Now, I've known a lot of immoral people in my life. I have been known also to violate many of the laws of man and some of the laws of God in the course of my storied career. But Bernie was the first amoral man I ever met. Amoral. You might call him a sociopath, I don't know, but he was amoral. And we did not get along at all. I had very little to do with him. He couldn't do the time, and he was trying desperately to get somebody to kill him. And I was sitting at the table with two gangster disciple contract killers. They're very dangerous people. And I could sit with them because I'm not a rat. So they were fine. We were talking, and Bernie came up and said, he used the N-word. He said, what are you doing with these two, whatever? And I said, oh, my God. I looked at the two guys and said, look, I just got my clean shirt for the year. Please, I don't want any blood on me. And they said, no, don't worry. He said, he can't do the time. We're not going to touch him. Don't worry. So at one point, he baited me, goaded me, and he said something very disrespectful about my wife, Esther. And I just turned around and looked at him, and I said, what did you say? And he repeated it. You never insult a man's wife in prison, ever. You don't do that. But his insult was way over the line. And the same two guys pulled me off him, telling me, come on, you're smarter than this. He wants you to kill him. So he went to the hospital, broken sternum, broken arms. I mean, I snapped. And several weeks later, but nobody ratted on me. It was strange. The captain called me in, and she looked at me and she said, "A little bird told me that someone looking just like you put Madoff in the hospital. You want to respond to that?" I said, "Does the little bird have a name?" And she said, I'm not going to have him killed. I know what you're capable of. I'm not going to have him killed. So she said, "Just answer me yes or no." And I said, "Captain, for as long as I've known you, I've never lied to you. Correct?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm not going to answer this question then." And she said, "Okay." She said, "In that case, you tell the person," she looked right at me, "who did this, that if I catch him, he's going to do 6 months in the hole on bread and water." And I looked at her and I said, "Why would you do that?" And she said, "Because he didn't finish the job."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I'll tell him, I'll pass along the advice." He was universally loathed.
In the end, he killed himself, I think.
No. He died. He was very sick. He
died.
had a number of ailments. And I remember when he had two sons who died. One committed suicide. The other one died of leukemia or cancer. And in both cases, he came to me and asked me, how do I say Kaddish and what do I do? And I told him, with the first boy that hung himself, a troubled man, I said, "You have to give money to tzedakah, for the elevation of his soul." And he said, "I'm not a fucking friar. I'm not going to do that. Why should I give any money?" And I said, "You have to. Ilui nishmato. You have to do this." He said, "I'm not going to do it." So I did. I was making 20 cents an hour in the factory at the time, and I gave $5 to a charity for the elevation of this boy's soul. And I did it for the next son who died of cancer. He wouldn't give a penny. Nothing. For his own sons. Now, that's amoral. That's not immoral.
What happened to your roommate?
I'm still paying his legal fees.
He's still there?
Yeah, he's completely innocent. I've known a lot of men in prison who were overly punished, but he's the only one I know who was completely and utterly innocent of the crimes that he was convicted of. He was out of the country at the time. He had an affair with his wife's best friend. The best friend, of course, had to tell her. Her brother was an explosive ordnance guy for the Army. They made a bomb, went off. His fingerprints were on the bomb. And he was out of the country, and the Army refused to tell the court that he had an alibi because it was classified. And so he got more time, 3 consecutive natural life sentences. And the judge himself said, I know you're innocent. So let the guy go. I mean, what's the problem? Well, that's American justice. I'm sorry. So he was a bona fide Noahide, by the way. First one I ever met. And from birth. I mean, he was a genuine Noahide, the genuine item. And I hope I can get him out. I don't know.
Do you have people that visit him on your behalf? Is that
No,
allowed
I have
even?
to be careful about that.
Yeah.
I've got to be really, really careful about this.
You can't leave Israel, right? Is that?
No, I've left Israel many times.
Oh, you have?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
For
okay.
business.
Yeah.
Mostly Europe, Eastern Europe. Mostly.
You're not going to America, though. That's not,
No.
No.
One of the reasons why I had to get out of the country as fast as I did was because we were told that the incoming Biden administration was going to indict me for obstruction of justice, asking for a life sentence. And it's a sealed indictment. So if I ever decide to go back, and the only reason I would go back to the United States would be to get my parents and move them to Har HaMenuchot or Har Zaytim or something,
I see.
to bury them in Kever Yisrael.
I see.
So there's no reason for me to go.
If you don't mind, because we're going to need to wrap up soon, and I don't want to be honest with you, because there's so many things that come out of talking to you, and I don't know if it's ever going to go left or right, pun intended, in terms of the discussions. Didn't see that coming in terms of the relationship and who you were with and Bernie, that story. But I'd like to know if you can take us to the part where, because again, I'm remembering as a kid and the whole world was advocating for you, protesting for you. And it meant a lot for me. And, I could say on behalf of a lot of people that are in my family, friends, and circle, when we found out the news that, the redemption is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through the process of you going into prison. Can you take me a little bit through the process of you getting out in terms of how did you hear about it? What was that like for you? Looking back.
I came up, we don't believe in coincidence as Jews, but it just so happened that I came up for my first parole hearing, statutory parole hearing, at the time of the political debate over the JICPOA with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Nuclear Agreement with them. And the first parole hearing was a disaster. And my lawyers were telling the Assistant Attorney General for National Security the fact that there were any number of people, including the former head of the CIA, that was advocating for my release because I'd come up with a number of technological developments that would be good for the United States. And the guy on the TV, this assistant attorney general, said, we don't care. We don't care. You're staying in prison for the rest of your life. And I looked at my lawyers and they said, say whatever you want now, just don't curse. So I looked at the guy and I said, the tragedy of this situation is you hate me more than you love the United States. And he went berserk. Oh, my lawyer looked at me and said, that was good. You got him. You got him. So the second hearing came up about 3-4 months later. And I just said, why am I going? I said, well, you have to. Unbeknownst to me, the Obama administration had decided to use me as a means of embarrassing Israel. And those people on the Senate in particular that were kind of backing Israel's call for the United States not to reach a nuclear agreement with Iran. So I show up to this hearing, and the first conversation is, well, you're going to be going to New York. And, and I just looked at my lawyer and I said, he said, just be quiet, just listen. And, okay. And I didn't know that day on CNN and everywhere else there was this barrage of horrible anti-Israel propaganda coming out from the government, that this man who got parole today was responsible for the worst, treason in the world, and, so many agents died. It was just total lies. But it was meant to embarrass Israel. Well, like Balaam and Balak, it kind of backfired. So the day before I was supposed to be released, I was called to the warden's office, and the secretary looked at me and she said, I'm really sorry, Jonathan, but you're not being released. Okay. So I went back home steaming, and I called Esther, alayhi shalom. She was my morah. And the worst thing you can call an Israeli is a friar. That's the worst thing. You can call him a murderer, you can call him a two-timer, you can call him anything you want. You don't call an Israeli a friar. Those are fighting words. That's how I felt. So she said, okay, be quiet, daven. Whatever comes into your head, which I did. And 2 hours later, I was called back to the warden's office, and the secretary looked at me and she said, I am so sorry. I switched the names. You're leaving tomorrow at 7:00. So this is the only bracha I give to people. what I davened for, or what I said, because I know it works. That's what I said, and it just came into my head. So there are two things I would like to share with you, or three things, just if I could, in conclusion. One day, it was very snowy, and the roads were impassable, and the captain came to see me and said, we don't have visiting today. The cameras are off. They're all frozen solid, but your wife is in the visiting room, Esther. She walked 10 kilometers in the snow. You couldn't even see the road. She just walked. And he said, my own wife would kill me if I didn't let you meet. So he took me into the visiting room. There you're not supposed to touch your wife, nothing. So, the captain just said, you can kiss her if you want. It's okay. Now a restrained kiss. So I said, okay. I kissed her. So we sat down. I had my arm around her, and we're watching the snowfall. And I look over at the officer, and he's snoring. And I know that the cameras are off. I said, excuse me. So I went over to him. I woke him up. And I said, do you want to make $1,000? And he said, what do you have in mind? And I said, just leave. I said, I know the cameras are off. Just stand outside the door for 20 minutes, and lock the door. And he looked at her, and he looked at me, and he said, if it were anybody else, I said, I know you want kids. He said, if it were anybody else, I would say fine. But he said, if she gets pregnant, it's my neck, because I'm going to lose my job. I'm sorry. And I said, no, it's okay. It's fine. So I sat down. So Esther looked at me and she said, what was that all about? So I told her. And she hit me in the shoulder very, very, very hard. And I said, what did you do that for? She said, $1,000, that's all I'm worth? And I said, it's all the money I have in all the years in prison working, slaving in a factory. This is all my money. So the second story was what happened. There was a man, an older guy, who had broken out of every prison he was sent in. Never hurt anybody. He was a serial bank robber, very successful, embarrassed the police. He was dying of pancreatic cancer, and they were not giving him pain medication. They wanted him to suffer. And boy, did he suffer. So one night, the guys came and got me and said, he wants somebody to kill him. You got to deal with him. I mean, you talk him out of it or something. I mean, he never ratted on anybody, so he's a righteous guy with us, so you don't want something bad to happen to him. So I sat down next to him on his bed. He was crying, and I held his hand, and he said, please kill me. Please, I'm begging you. I can't take this anymore, the pain. So I looked at him, and I said, listen to me. You know you're going, right? He said, yeah. I said, you're going to be before God soon. And you don't want to go down. You just want to go up if you can. So you have to live another day and another day. And he said, why? I said, to bless God. That's why. And he didn't understand really what I was talking about. And another friend of mine who also was dying of cancer, but they were going to let him go home on compassionate leave. He had maybe a month to live. He was metastatic. He wasn't going to be. He ripped the Vicodin patch off his arm, and it left a blue line, which meant another 5 years. And he slapped it on the guy's neck, and the guy just kind of relaxed. And we were all stunned. I looked at him and I said, "What did you do? Are you crazy? You're about to go home after God knows how many years. You've been 35, 36 years in prison. Why did you do that?" He said, "I listened to what you said to this guy." And he said, "I've lived a very bad life. I've killed a lot of people. I've done a lot of bad things." He said, "Maybe what I just did will look good in God's eyes. So, of course, within about an hour, he was arrested. There was a rat. He was arrested. And I, the next day, with hundreds of inmates, black, brown, oriental, white, whatever, were lined up at the internal security office to plead for this guy. So finally, I indexed up, and I looked at the officer, and he said, "What are you doing in here? You never talked to us." And I said, why I was there, and he said, "You see the shredded paper?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I shredded it." He said, "I can't charge him after what he did." He said it was one of the most altruistic things I've ever seen in prison. So he's going to go home in 2 days. We're going to advance it and let him go home. So in 2 days, almost everybody in the prison was lined up to say goodbye. Why? Because in an environment like that, where life is really, really cheap, for somebody to stand up and do something like that with nothing to gain from it kind of gave us all hope in man. So he died about 3 weeks later. The last thing I have to tell you is one day Esther came to see me, and she had been sent by the cabinet, Bibi's cabinet. I was surprised. I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, Kerry, the Secretary of State, had offered to release you. I said, "What's the catch?" She said, he wants 150 terrorists with blood on their hands to be released. And she said, "You can't come home. If you agree to this, you're going to stay here in the midbar for the rest of your life. Free, but in the desert." But she said, "Before you answer me," I said, why am I being asked? And she said, "Bibi's putting it on you. It's up to you to decide whether this deal goes forward or not." I mean, I thought at the moment that's a really horrible burden to put on me because I know I'm never getting out otherwise. But he also understood what I was going to say. So she said, "Before you answer, I want you to understand that whatever you decide, whether you decide in prison to stay in prison, I will stay here with you. Or if you decide to stay in the midbar, as she called it, I will stay with you." That's why over her grave, on her stone, kind of a half moon, half circle, is the quote from Tehillim, "I knew you in your youth in the desert. I loved you in your youth in the desert." So she said, "What's your answer?" So I said, "No." She said, "Well, could you give me a slightly longer answer? Because I have to go back and brief the cabinet." I said, "Yeah, hell no." And she said, "No, you're an educated man," I thought. "Could you just give me an educated answer?" And I said, "Okay, fine. There are 3 reasons. Number 1, it would devalue the life of the victims. Number 2, it would lower deterrence. It would encourage other Arabs to murder Jews. And thirdly, it would inflict terrible pain on the families. While they might want me out, not this way." So she said, those are very good answers, but it's not the Jewish answer. So I said, "Okay, what's the Jewish answer?" And she said, "There are only 2 ways you can come home, either as a met, you're dead, and we'll put you in Knesset Yisrael, or you'll come home as an old man and kiss the ground." I thought, why isn't there a 3rd way that I could come home as a young man and just, but that's what she told me. And she said, "I want you to remember something. Go back to the Meragalim. They actually voted to stay in the midbar for their COVID." And she said, "We've been paying for that ever since." So she said, "That is why you said no, because you don't want more pain and suffering on the Jewish people because of your decision to stay in the midbar." And I said, "That's the Jewish answer?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, you can put my name on that." But that's why I kissed the ground when I came back. it just seemed like the natural thing to do. So
I'm really happy that you spent time telling us about her, because it was on my mind a lot, and I appreciate that.
Esther, look what she did at the end of her life. She did the shidduch with my current wife. She just had hours to live. And, when I asked her, why did you do this? I heard the words I was living in dread hearing. She said, I'm going today, and I want you to be happy. There was a moment when I was asked to go up to the Golan, Ramat Golan, to look at some things, and she insisted on coming. And I said, sweetheart, you can't walk. You can barely breathe. What? She said, I have to go. So I carried her. And she said, take me up to the top of this little hill, which I did. And there's Syria on one side and Lebanon, within a couple of meters. And we have security around us. And she said, look north. I looked north. And she said, what do you see? I said, I see Hezbollah. The flags were everywhere. And she said, look further. What do you see? And I said, more Hezbollah. And she said, no, look with your nefesh. As far as you can see, what do you see? I said, I don't know what. She said, Eretz Hatzvi. So she said, I won't be around to see it, but hopefully you will be. So my parting gift to everybody is that we should all be zoche to see that, what she saw.
Amen. Thank you so much for sharing. Really, really appreciate today. And wow, thank you, Dave, for being here.
Thank you for the unbelievable opportunity to be part of this.
And this was amazing. This is by me, as the millions of people that bump into you in Yerushalayim every day. This was not a coincidence.
No, we don't believe in coincidence.
Exactly.
We just
and
don't.
I can't wait to give tzedakah in Leila Nishmas, your previous wife.
Esther
Yocheved Bas.
Rezel Bracha.
Rezel Bracha. May her neshama have an aliyah.
Amen.
And may all the neshamas that are not with us have an aliyah. And thank you again for
It was my pleasure.
your heroism. For thank you for being who you are. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for your love of life, and for infusing that into this session and this discussion. Guys, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for listening. Thanks for getting involved. I can't ask for more. And thank you, Hashem, for this opportunity, for being here today. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That was amazing.